President of American Commitment and a leading free market policy analyst. I read about this and I am appalled. I literally am appalled. What did they do and how did they make this deal behind the scenes?
It really is outrageous. When the Obamacare law was being written, one of the things the American people were very clear about was if you're designing a new healthcare system for the rest of us, you need to be willing to put yourselves in it to show that it actually is a good system, actually is quality, actually is affordable, all these other promises that you're making. And so they actually did that. In the law itself, they included something called Section 1312 D3D that terminated the previous employer coverage that members of Congress had under the Federal Employee Health Benefits Plan and required them to go into Obamacare. It did not provide for any employer contribution. But as we were getting close to this provision taking effect in 2014, members of Congress started going crazy, saying, how could we possibly pay? This is going to cost thousands and thousands of dollars. They didn't want to vote to change the law they had passed because that would have been very damaging for them politically. So they went to President Obama and they quietly behind the scenes said, hey, can you bail us out of our own Obamacare law? And President Obama, understanding that it would have been unseemly for them to reopen the law and so forth, he said, yeah, no problem. And as you mentioned, he directed the Federal Office of Personnel Management to authorize an employer contribution for members of Congress, despite the fact there is no such contribution provided by law. But they had a practical problem, which is the regular Obamacare exchange does not legally allow and has no logistical mechanism for an employer contribution. So what they did to implement this scheme is they said, we'll have the House and Senate pretend to be small businesses, and we'll put them in the District of Columbia Small Business Exchange, and then we'll make taxpayer-funded employer contributions to cover the cost of premiums for members of Congress. And in fact, we learned through Judicial Watch's FOIA litigation that they filed just 2 forms certifying the House of Representatives as a small business with less than 50 employees, even though it has 435 members and thousands of staffers, and the U.S. Senate as a small business with less than 50 employees, even though it has 100 senators and thousands of staffers. And this scheme has continued to this day. It began in 2013. It continues to this day. You and I and all of your viewers are paying the premiums for health insurance for members of Congress, despite the fact the law said they were supposed to be in Obamacare like anyone else without employer coverage.
Bill, I'm horrified at the hypocrisy, especially the Republicans who, would not vote together to repeal this monstrosity called Obamacare. Is it because they're taking that subsidy too? And how much is the subsidy, by the way, that each guy is getting there? Is that for the members of Congress and each of their staffers? And how far does that go, that subsidy?
It's for members of Congress and for their staffers. It is 72% of the total premiums. So it varies by plan, depending on which plan they pick. And there are a lot of different choices in the Small Business Exchange in D.C., unlike most of the rest of the country in Obamacare. And so it varies, but it can be as much as about $12,000 for each individual, which is a lot of money, and it really insulates them from the cost of Obamacare. And the whole point of this provision was to make them feel the pain if it didn't work.
Well, say, I'm a little guy out in the boondocks, and I've got these enormous premiums and these huge deductibles, which really make my insurance ineffective. And you're saying the government is going to pick up 72% of the premiums of every one of those, every staffer, every congressman, every senator, every one of them is going to get that kind of subsidy? Is that what you just said?
They are presently receiving that subsidy, and in my view, it's unlawful, and I hope President Trump does end it.
Well, why hasn't there been some outcry? Is it just so hidden that nobody knows about it yet?
Well, I think there has been some outcry. Everyone I've talked to about it has been outraged, and it's beginning to get more attention and a little bit more coverage. But one of the challenges on an issue like this is when both parties in Washington, D.C. benefit from something, it's hard to shine a spotlight on it. You don't have those natural allies and that natural platform to raise the issue. And so it's been a bit of a challenge from that standpoint because you're right, Republicans and Democrats have been taking advantage of this.